My name is Lee Moore, and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast. In the last episode, I introduced Jin Yong, the man who pretty much single-handedly invented the modern form of Kung Fu literature, the best-selling author in all of Chinese history. 300 million books that he's written have been purchased, though if you combine that number with the number of books pirated, it's probably going to be more like a billion books. Again, that's just a rumor that I've read, but that's the best data that we have on it. After I aired that last episode, Laszlo Montgomery over at the Great China History podcast told me he was airing an episode on Jin Yong, an interview he did with Alice Poon. She herself is a Hong Kong fantasy science fiction writer. The two of them talk about Jin Yong. Check that out. I'm going to link to it on the podcast page. It's a really good interview. Laszlo and I did not coordinate this. It was just fate. 真有缘分, as we say in Chinese. It was really fated. In the last episode, when I talked about Jin Yong, I didn't do a particular text that he had written. This week's episode, I'm going to dive into a particular text, The Sword of the Yue Maiden. Yue Nu Jian. Yue Nu Jian. The Sword of the Yue Maiden is a text that I taught last quarter for my Chinese popular culture class. I'm teaching it in about 2 weeks in my Chinese narrative class. This is a short story. Actually, I don't know if you can call it that. I'm putting the word short in scare quotes. It gets kind of long. My students complained about it being too long, and it's a little bit longer than what I normally assign. The story is about 14,000 words long in English translation. That doesn't qualify as a book. It's kind of getting up there into novella length, though. It's a fairly long short story. But the reason I assign it is because it's Jin Yong's shortest work. So if I want to do something on Jin Yong, I have to assign it. His full-length novels are stunningly long and even more convoluted than this short story. That's actually the reason that it's taken me so long to do a podcast on Jin Yong. He's long. I'm not a big fan of his style, but again, I can't underline this often enough. Jin Yong is the best-selling author in Chinese history, full stop. So whatever I think of Jin Yong, it doesn't matter. Whenever you hear me whining about how long he is or how difficult it can be to follow his plot lines, I want you to hear a cash register sound effect in the background. The man sold books. Something that I am starting out as an author only realizing how much work it is to sell books. Okay, that's enough about context. If you want more, check out the previous episode that I did, or check out that episode with Alice Poon at the China History podcast. Let's get into The Sword of the Yue Maiden. So this story was serialized like so many of his novels, I think all of them. The story is serialized from January 1970 in the Ming Pao Evening Supplement. Ming Pao was his paper. He was the owner. This short story is the last work of Kung Fu fiction that he publishes, but it's surprisingly also the story with the setting that is the earliest of all the settings that Jin Yong creates for his novels. The story is set during the Spring and Autumn period. The Spring and Autumn period lasts from 770 to 476 BC in Chinese history. This story takes place sometime in the 470s BC. There is an ongoing conflict between two states, the state of Wu and the state of Yue. These states are both in southern China. Jin Yong's story is actually the melding of these two different folklores that are coming together. First, there's this folklore about these two states, the state of Wu and the state of Yue. These two states are beefing, they're fighting with each other, they're having a series of wars. There's a long litany of things that both the king of Wu, and his name is King Fuchai, and King Gojian, who is the king of Yue, there's this long list of things that they have been fighting. The two countries have been fighting for a while. Jin Yong's story picks up right in the middle of this. King Gojian of Wu has been on the losing end of these fights. King Guojin was captured and forced to be the slave of King Fuchai for 3 years. King Fuchai of Wu, in the ultimate boneheaded, naive move in Chinese literature, releases King Guojin, telling him, okay, I've shown you how powerful I am. Don't mess with me again. And then he gives King Guojin his freedom. But what he doesn't know is that King Guojin has sworn that he will do whatever it takes, spend all of the money he has, waste as many years of his life as he needs in order to get vengeance on King Fuchai for enslaving him. All of that is background. All of that happens before the story begins. All of that is a legend well known to all Chinese school children. There's actually a famous Chengyu about it. 卧薪尝胆. It literally means something like sleeping on wood and tasting gall. And that is what King Guojin had to do for years in order to remind himself that he is going to seek vengeance on King Fuchai. The story begins as King Guojin is trying to figure out a way to get that vengeance. He spent years sleeping on wood and tasting gall. He is scheming for how to get his vengeance. And in the opening scene, you have a sword fight going on, but as the story begins, it's not actually clear what's going on. They're just two groups of men fighting. As you read, it becomes clear that they're just having not a play fight, that's not the right word, maybe some sort of fight competition. The competition is between these two groups of the brocade-clad men and the black-robed men. King Guojin is asking them to fight. As the story progresses, it becomes clear that King Guojin is having the fighters from Yue fight the best fighters from the kingdom of Wu in order to prepare them to attack the kingdom of Wu. Of course, the fighters from Wu never realize that this is King Guojin's plan. They think they're just showing off. They're just flexing on the people of Yue. Part of the reason that they think this is because King Guojin is super submissive to King Fuchai and others from Wu. King Guojin goes out of his way to make it clear that he wants to be submissive. But again, this is all just part of Guojin's plan to trick King Fuchai and the rest of the people of the kingdom of Wu into thinking that he is not a danger. Another reason that these fighters don't get what's going on is because they're just all super cocky. These fighters from Wu think they're bad mamma jammas. They're drunk. They start talking crap to the people of Yue. The people of Yue want to fight them, but again, because King Guojin wants to be submissive, he doesn't want to show that he is actually seeking vengeance. So he's very strategic, and he orders his people, the people of Yue, not to fight the Wu foreigners, no matter what. You have to be submissive. You can't show that you're seeking vengeance. So these fighters from Wu, they're out there, they're drunk, they're strutting their stuff, picking fights with the locals. They need someone to fight. The locals have been ordered not to fight them, not to show their strength, not to show their anger. But these fighters from Wu, they want to fight. They need someone to kill. So what do? They run into a little girl who has a goat, and they slice the girl's goat in half, just like the bullies that they are. But then something unexpected happens. The girl tells those goat-murdering punks that they can't go around bullying people and murdering other people's goats. The little girl's parents are there, and they are like, no, leave these mean men alone. Get out of there. But the girl actually takes a bamboo pole that she has been using for herding, and she's obviously not going to need it anymore for herding. And what does she do? She goes and whoops all of them drunken, cocky Wu warriors. She blinds some of them with her pole. It gets kind of nasty. And then you know what she does? She actually taunts these goat-murdering Wu folks. She goes, all right, now how much money are you going to give me to pay me to compensate me for my goat that y'all killed? The girl's name is Ah Ching. She is a shepherd from a poor family. She hates having to sell her goats for people to eat, but she has no other way of making money to buy food for her family. One of King Gojin's bureaucrats, his name is Fan Li. Fan Li is the political genius behind King Gojin's plot to take revenge on King Fuchai. Fan Li sees this fight. Fan Li sees Qing whoop these Wu warriors. And Fan Li says, Qing, I will feed your family. All I want you to do, little girl, is to train our soldiers to kick butt like that. And then Fan Li asks Qing, where did you learn to fight like that? Who is your master? Qing replies, I ain't got no master. I just learned my moves from play fighting with Grandpa Bai. Who is Grandpa Bai? Grandpa Bai lives up in the mountains. He's actually not a human, but a white ape. Jin Yong says Grandpa Bai is a white ape. Of course, we all know that humans are themselves apes, but Jin Yong got his PhD in Chinese history, not anthropology, so we're going to give him a pass. Anyways, Fan Li goes up and tries to see Grandpa Bai. Fan Li actually starts fighting Grandpa Bai, and Grandpa Bai tries to kill Fan Li. But Qing ends up breaking up their fight and actually breaking the arm of Grandpa Bai. What happens next? Qing goes to the palace. She shows off her kung fu skills for King Gojin. She whoops all of the Yue swordsmen. Not the Wu swordsmen, the Yue swordsmen who are working for King Gojin. Qing is amazing at fighting, and these kung fu masters employed by King Gojin just cannot keep up with her. But a couple of them are able to pick up some skills just by watching her. Then Qing disappears, vanishes. We don't know where she goes. King Gojin raises an army, invades Wu. His men, using the skills Qing taught them, they stomp Wu. King Fuchai retreats into the mountains. Then Fan Li, that political genius, reconnects with Xi Shi. Xi Shi is famous in Chinese literature as a beautiful woman. She's also famous as someone who's dangerous. In this case, Xi Shi has been deployed by Fan Li as an agent of sexpionage. That is, a spy who uses sex as an entree to be an influence agent. Xi Shi has been sleeping with King Fuchai, but also she's apparently whispering secrets to Fan Li, though that part is never discussed in the story. That is just known from the historical context that Jin Yong's imagined reader would be expected to have. Fan Li reconnects with Xi Shi. They're lovers, apparently, though obviously not exclusive lovers, since she has been sleeping with King Fuchai. Fan Li and Xi Shi talk about how much they have missed each other. They're having this moment of reconnection. It's very pretty. And who should show up? Qing, of course. And what does Qing do? She tries to kill Xi Shi. Fan Li realizes that the reason Qing, this girl with the goat, helped the state of Yue, it has nothing to do with her being patriotic. It's entirely because she has a little girl crush on Fan Li himself. When Qing sees Xi Shi and Fan Li reuniting, that breaks Qing's heart. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but even if I did want to spoil the ending, I actually don't know how I could, because the end is pretty ambiguous. I'm not sure what happens. It's kind of weird. We were talking about it in class. No one actually agreed on what happened at the end of the story. I'm not going to give y'all any more clues. What I can say is that this story is a good entree for someone wanting to get into Jin Yong, but doesn't know where to start. This story is great for the following reasons. Like I said at the beginning, this story is relatively short compared with Jin Yong's other work. It'll take you probably 2 hours to read. It's not super short, but it is the shortest that Jin Yong does. Second, the story is pretty exciting. I hope that came across in the retelling. I have, in my retelling, eliminated some of the more boring parts. Jin Yong has this tendency to be very discursive. I didn't talk about the history of the sword or the sword maker, because I didn't think that really added much to the story, but there are whole chapters dedicated to that. I'm not supposed to say this as a person with a PhD in literature who teaches literature. You should feel free to skip those parts of the story. the writer has an obligation to you, the reader. You, as the reader, do not have that much of an obligation to the writer. Maybe you have some obligation, but it's very limited. I give you permission. Do it. Okay. Third, the reason this is a good story to start with is that this story shows how Jin Yong incorporates earlier Chinese mythologies into his own modern fairy tales. So we have the story of Go Jian, the story of Xi Shi, and the story of Ah Qing, the Yue Maiden. All three of these stories come together in a repackaging of earlier Chinese mythologies. And the fourth reason that this story is a good story to start out on is Jin Yong's story here has actually been translated and placed online on a website that I actually think is a fantastic resource. I'm going to link to it in the podcast site, but that website is called wuxia So that's WUXIA society.com. wuxiasociety.com has tons of translations of Kung Fu fiction, that is wuxia fiction, and they just happen to have translated the entire Sword of the Yue Maiden into English. I'm going to post that link in the podcast website, ChineseLiteraturePodcast.com. Check the part under this particular episode, and I will put it into the show notes. I don't always do this, but I'm trying to put a transcript of the show notes into those episodes as well if you want to read through that. While you're on the website, ChineseLiteraturePodcast.com, if you wouldn't mind, please pre-order my book, China's Backstory, the literature and history behind today's front page China news. You don't have to give a credit card, just give your email address. My publisher will give you occasional updates on the book and its publication. Today's Chengyu, no extra points for guessing it, is 我心长胆. Like I said before, it literally means something like sleeping on wood and tasting gall. But today the phrase is used to mean something like someone who's willing to do whatever has to be done, enduring whatever hardships it takes to achieve that person's goals. This is actually a pretty good little Chengyu to have. I've heard it used many a times. All right, that's it for me. I'm Lee Moore, and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.